Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Access Minnesota brings you the newsmakers and the stories that shape our everyday lives, with analysis from University of Minnesota faculty experts.
Minnesota Army National Guard troops are setting out on a historic mission in Kuwait and Iraq. Members of the 1st Brigade Combat Team, known as the Red Bulls, will provide security as the remaining 50,000 U.S. troops in Iraq withdraw by year's end. This month on Access Minnesota, a look at Operation New Dawn and the Minnesota Guard's role as the American military presence winds down. We'll also hear about a program that provides support for children whose parents are serving abroad in the armed forces. And we'll see how University of Minnesota researchers are helping soldiers with post-traumatic stress disorder. But first, a few weeks ago, for one afternoon, Fort McCoy, Wisconsin transformed from a military training facility into one of the world's largest outdoor restaurants. It was a grand send-off for the Minnesota Guard's Red Bull Division as they prepare to depart for Kuwait and Iraq. Nearly 2,400 Minnesota Army National Guard troops are on their way to Kuwait in the second largest deployment since World War II. Last month, soldiers from the 1st Brigade Combat Team and their families enjoyed a steak dinner at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. The event was sponsored by the St. Paul-based organization Serving Our Troops. St. Paul City Council member Pat Harris is one of the organizers.
Well, you know, this is the 8th project for Serving Our Troops, and we're serving 6,500 steaks with all the trimmings, beverages, and music and more for 2,400 Minnesota National Guard members that are deploying for service in Kuwait, and about 3,500 of their family members that have driven from Minnesota here to Fort McCoy, Wisconsin to spend a muggy but fabulous afternoon with their family members before they depart overseas for Kuwait. So we've got excellent steaks that are on the grill right now. And we've got ice cold beverages, we got the baked potatoes, we got the music. It's we're all set for just really what is a message from Minnesota that says that we're thinking about you, we support you, and we care about you.
Harris says the idea behind Serving Our Troops originated at a St. Paul restaurant.
A bunch of us were sitting at Mancini's in St. Paul one night about 7 years ago, and we thought it was unfair that we could sit at Mancini's and potentially have a cold beer and a steak, and that our soldiers couldn't do that. And that night we said, you know what, this community can get together, and this community will bring this restaurant and all the other restaurants in St. Paul to our soldiers and families.
There were some very familiar faces among the Serving Our Troops volunteers. Governor Mark Dayton took up a spatula, and Congresswoman Betty McCollum had brownie duty. Senator Amy Klobuchar also helped dish out the treats, and says it's a great way to acknowledge the Guard's service and sacrifice.
Everyone is here, 100 volunteers from all over our state coming to help serve the troops. What we say is this is the biggest restaurant in the country today, and it's all here for a good reason, to show our support as a community. Minnesota has always been a state that has wrapped our arms around those who served us, and that's what this steak dinner is all about for them and their families. They're putting themselves on the front line, so able to bring the families together with a meal like this, something our state should be proud of.
Over in the beer tent, Congressman Iroq Paulson was hard at work.
First of all, it's important to know that the community does, and let them know the community does support their efforts, and we're proud of them. I mean, Minnesota is really proud of our servicemen and women, and hey, more than anything, the message I give them is do your job and come home safe.
The Guard members are being deployed to a base in Kuwait for 1 year, but their mission will take them deep inside Iraq as the U.S. forces draw down. Major General Richard Nash commands the Minnesota Army National Guard and says this mission will be different from previous Guard deployments in Iraq.
Well, this particular mission, you know, we're getting very close to the drawdown of our operations in Iraq. According to the President, you know, we'll be through with all operations in Iraq by December of 2011. So we're in that drawdown phase of Operation New Dawn. And that creates its own challenges because those that are in leadership positions within Iraq are also trying to make a political statement that may portend to the fact that they're driving the United States forces out. And so I'm concerned now at this very critical time in the history of Iraq that our soldiers will be almost more at risk just for the fact that someone's going to try and make some political statements for future reasons within Iraq, and our soldiers will be at risk because now they'll try and and use that for political purposes that they're driving the United States out, versus the agreements we've had between the United States government and the government of Iraq that we are holding up our agreement that we are leaving by the end of this year.
About 40% of the Guard members have served in Iraq previously, and some have been deployed there multiple times. Nash says the frequent deployments are a challenge to the troops.
I think the challenges are for us is to continue on, as you're seeing today, that community involvement, and to have them continuing to support our soldiers and airmen that are continuing deployment. Since 9/11, we've deployed over 24,000 soldiers and airmen, National Guard from Minnesota. So it's always a challenge when they're on that second and third and fourth deployment in terms of dealing with their employers and obviously with their families, their civilian careers, and keeping that interest level there, so our soldiers maintain that readiness level, that they maintain the training level, and certainly their situational awareness when they're in those combat zones.
Colonel Iroq is the 1st Brigade Combat Team's commanding officer and says this mission is both historic and challenging.
We're in a transition phase. We're part of the responsible drawdown in Iraq. So it's our job to, it's really quite an honor. It's our job to safely get the remaining soldiers out of Iraq to meet the President's intent to get out by the 1st of the year. We got 2 challenges. I've got 60% of my formation have never done this before. So they've got a lot to learn, but the easy thing is they're a blank slate. With the veterans, we've got a lot of experience, but it's changed. The conditions have changed dramatically. So we have to get their expectations under control, because what they expect to see is probably not what the reality is on the ground. So we've got to balance those 2 things.
National Guard troops have been deployed extensively in Iraq since 2003. It has been several decades since Guard members have been heavily involved in combat missions, and Kurska says that's changing the way the public views the Guard.
The Americans are terrible at history. There was the anomaly that you speak of was from 1965 till 7 years ago when LBJ didn't mobilize the Guard for Vietnam. Historically, the Guard has always been the first out the door from the Revolution on. And so American citizens today, their view of the Guard is skewed by this short 35-year period where the Guard had a different role. So now we're back to our traditional role. There's nobody more professional than my brigade. They don't have to worry about us at all. Nobody's better than us.
From 2005 to 2007, about 2,600 Minnesota Guard troops were deployed in Iraq. It was the longest deployment of any military unit in Iraq since hostilities began in 2003. The 1st Brigade Combat Team, or Red Bulls, served for 22 months, 16 of which were in Iraq. A major part of the mission was to provide security for convoys, but the Guard members also helped rebuild Iraq's infrastructure, including roads, hospitals, schools, water treatment plants, and irrigation facilities. Many of the Minnesota soldiers served in southern Iraq in Thikar province. As the Red Bulls prepared to leave Iraq in June of 2007, a ceremony was held to hand off control of an irrigation system built by the Minnesota Guard to the residents of El Batha, Iraq.
We have really enjoyed working with your governmental leaders and the tribal leaders to move this project forward and bring it to completion.
احنا جدا تمتعنا بالعمل سوية ويا المسؤولين الحكوميين وايضا بالشيوخ العشائر ورؤساء العشائر على مود ندفع هذا المشروع.
In our time here, we've seen new barley fields, new fields of wheat. We've seen chicken farms go up. We've seen a lot of progress in the area of agriculture, and we are glad to help be a part of that progress.
Prior to leaving Iraq in June 2007, Captain Jeremy Burnt reflected on what he learned while working with the Iraqis to rebuild the local infrastructure.
I'll remember the relationships that we've built with the different tribal leaders, with the government leaders that we've worked with. We've had some very trying times with some of them. They've helped us out tremendously through our own security, and also helping out their people in the village that they live with.
Colonel Kurska says he'd like to go back to Thikar province and see how things are going today.
I'm hopeful to get back there. I honestly don't know what the opportunities will be. I think they're fairly high because there's still a base there in Thikar province where we were at last time, so we'll still be traveling in and out of that base. Potentially the contacts that we had before, we can go back and do that. There's one sheikh I'd love to go see. He took me hunting, 4 years ago. I'd like to go back and see Sheikh Ali, see how he's doing.
Access Minnesota travels to Kuwait and Iraq this fall to follow the Red Bulls on their mission. We'll bring you that story on our November show. When Access Minnesota returns, we'll learn about a program that's helping kids cope when their parents are serving abroad in the armed forces.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages.